Welcome everybody, welcome to this event. It's fantastic to have you here. I also have a fly who's attending the event behind me, so you'll hear some buzzing around my computer. I can't usher him out, he will just not find his way out. So yeah, like I say, hello, welcome, fantastic to have you here. So as advertised, this is going to be an interactive introduction to action research in education with the lovely Dr. Lynette Morris and the lovely Zahra Alizadeh. We welcome you, whether you've just heard about action research for the first time or you're the world's biggest expert in it. And we want to really hold this space this afternoon, early evening as a warm and inclusive event. So everyone hosting this event is based in the Education Department at Middlesex University in London. And within that, we're running this event as a taster for our MA Childhood and Education in Diverse Societies, which we're currently recruiting for the September 2021 start. I'll say just a couple of things in a moment about the MA, but before I do that, let me tell you a bit about the event and kind of what to expect in terms of format. So after me, Lynette will be giving a 15-minute presentation, just really like blasting it at you, the principles, the practices of action research in education, very much an introduction. Lynette is then going to hand over to Zahra, who is one of our MA students currently, and she's working with Lynette at the moment on an action research project, and she's going to be talking about that project and how the action research is actually playing out in reality. We're then going to shake things up a bit with a breakout discussion where we'll invite you to take some very early steps in developing an action research project, thinking about responding to a problem or a challenge that you face at the moment. So don't be scared about that. It's really just a chance to meet other people, to start to verbalize really rough and ready ideas. And mostly, to be honest, a chance to chat to some other people. We'll then have a brief chance, we'll come back together and we'll have some comments, we'll have some questions as a big group again, and we'll close the event for 6 p.m. As always, some kind of technical housekeeping stuff. So please keep your mic on mute so that we don't get any background noise. Apologies for my background noise. I've got 5 children in my house at the moment, not all my own, but they make a lot of noise. And I'm sure you will hear some of that at some point. And you're very, very welcome to use the chat throughout. So a lovely way to start is just by introducing yourself and saying where you are in the world. And I always like to share a bit of the weather where I am, which is baking hot in London. And it's always lovely doing that to get a sense of who is actually in the room, that we are real people with real presence in one another's presence. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're running this event in association with the MA Childhood and Education in Diverse Societies. This year it's running as an online distance learning program. We're trying to kind of learn through COVID and renew ourselves and bring ourselves online and distance-based. And running through the MA is a real commitment to making change in childhood and education. So as part of this, we put a big emphasis on new ways of thinking about childhood and education, but we really also focus on building our capacity to make change on the ground, to actually do the stuff on the ground that makes a difference. And so as part of that, one of our optional modules focuses specifically on using action research in education, and Dr. Lynette Morris leads that module. So this taster event is very much coming from kind of being born out of that module. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over now to Lynette for her introductory presentation.
Hi everybody, absolutely wonderful to be here, and I hope the next not quite an hour now that we spend together, that it will be valuable to you, and we'll certainly get some enjoyment out of it, as well as obviously knowledge and experiences. I'm just going to share my PowerPoint now with you, so just bear with me for a moment. It's a bit slow, I'm afraid. Apologies. There we go. Right, okay. So, as Mona has already explained, I'm going to do approximately about sort of 15 minutes talking very much an overview of what action research is, who does action research, why we do it, and if I've got time at the end, talking a little bit about some of the critics and some of the things that we can do to kind of mitigate some of the criticisms against or put forward as regarding action research. So let's start off with the first of those questions. What is action research? Well, if I was going to define action research, I think the first thing that I would pull up from it is this idea of it's practical in nature. It addresses real world issues and problems, okay? And it's very much linked to professional development. So it's looking at things that we have in our real world day-to-day work within education, looking at those difficulties we have or areas that we want to develop in. So it's very much looking at affecting changes. That's integral to action research. It's also very important, the researcher's role. It's a participant, it's an active role. The research is about the researcher and the researcher's actions. It very much follows a cyclic process. So the cycles are very much alternating between action and periods of critical reflection. So there's action and then critically reflecting upon that action, which then will generate another action. These are called cycles, okay? And each cycle, it can be broken down into 5 stages, a 5-stage process. These stages, they follow reflective models, things such as Kolb or Gibbs, these kind of pretty standard reflective models that we use as reflective practitioners in any case. So it's not alien, those kind of processes to any of you. So each cycle, if we can break it down into these 5 sort of stages of process, we would start with the natural identifying a problem. So that in itself can be quite a process, okay? And that's why today we're hoping to start you off on that road, on that journey. So that's something that we're going to be doing a bit later. So if the first stage is identifying problem, this is in agreement with Norton and McNiff, who have written prolifically on action research. And they all agree your first thing is you have to identify that problem. And then once you've identified the problem, it's very much about down to you reflecting and spending time and just imagining, almost like blue sky thinking, imagining what could I possibly do? What could possibly be done to mitigate or alleviate those difficulties that I'm experiencing? As soon as you've come up with something, it's then about putting in some kind of intervention. So the stage 3 would be implementing some kind of change in your practice. If you're going to put in a change, the natural step 4 is going to be you're going to evaluate what's the outcomes of that change. And if your outcomes are actually moving in a positive direction, you might be thinking about stage 5, which is about putting that change into your practice. So your evaluation has actually helped you make that decision. This is something I want to carry on doing. This is going to be a part of my practice. On the other hand, things don't always go exactly how you're going to imagine. And even the most wonderful, enlightened imaginings and wonderful ideas we come up with, sometimes they don't produce always the fabulous results that we hope for. So in which case, your evaluation of that change is going to pull that up and bring that up. So perhaps you're going to think of, okay, that didn't work. I understand now why that hasn't worked. So I'm going to reflect again, and I'm going to think about what else do I need to do. And this doesn't have to be all on your own. This is very much can be collaborative, and talking to your peers, talking to other teachers, other colleagues, talking to your SLT, talking to parents, and of course, very importantly, talking to the children or young people that are actually going to be affected by your practice and these changes. So that's a cycle. That is your 5 stages for a cycle. So what kind of tends to lead on from this is that rather than it just being it happens once, all done, all dusted, we've got our change, it tends to be a spiraling process. So we go through cycles and we learn from those cycles. We might adjust our methods. We might decide we need a bit more data before actually our evaluation is complete. And as we go into those cycles, we keep cycling upwards and changing, small changes often, from each time that we reflect and evaluate an action or intervention that we've put in place. So that's very much an overview of what is action research. And a very important part of this is who does action research. So I've already mentioned it's kind of about us, and the researcher is a participant within the research. So it's typically designed and conducted by practitioners to improve their own practice and to share that feedback with their team members. Because we don't work in isolations in education, we don't work in isolation, we work in teams. And if we find something that's working with our students, we need to share that, don't we? So, it's very much designed by practitioners, discussed by practitioners, and any changes rolled out amongst the team. An alternative term you'll often hear, because I've kept saying practitioners here, is practitioner research. So you might know all about action research already before you ever came here, but you've been calling it practitioner research. It's just they're interchangeable as far as I can glean from any of the reading that I've done. I've said already, it's research that's from within. Another term that we use is insider research, because it's not looking at any kind of problem from some sort of external expert eye, who actually might find it quite difficult for being an outsider for them to actually, grasp what the difficulty or the problem is. They might have limited interactions with a group or community that you work with. So actually expecting them to come up with some enlightening solution to your problem is probably, not very realistic in a lot of circumstances. So it's insider research. The practitioner is carrying out the research on what they do within their role. So it's research in action rather than being about action. And it recognizes that practitioners, they can and they should contribute to research, initiated by them, directed by them, controlled by them. It's a practitioner's story, and it's their story about, their work with children and young people, their interactions with their colleagues and the SLT, and their partnership with parents. So it's very much their story to tell through their research. And there's a whole lot of, if you start looking for published action research papers, it's not generalizable to a pure extent, the findings, because obviously it's very context linked, it's very contextual, but it's kind of up to the reader of an action research paper to make those links themselves and draw from it what they feel to be useful. Okay. So what we know now, why do we do action research? Well, I've kind of put down a list here. So the obvious first one, to address practical problems. Next one, to generate knowledge. And that's kind of what I was saying before, that there is the knowledge within your own institution, okay, that you're generating and you're sharing. But beyond that, there's every possibility that something that has come out of your action research, the knowledge is very useful for other people. So other than knowledge generation, we've got to encourage evaluative practice and alternates between action and critical reflection. So all teachers, all educators, all the time, we're assessing in everything that we do, we're evaluating in everything that we do. And it's helping us to put that within a kind of a framework. So we've got this cycle and this spiraling framework to put that within. I've got down here the next one, to collaborate for practice improvement. And again, it's very much about collaboration within teams, within institutions, not even between institutions as well. And, this idea of making a community of practice where practitioners can come together and they can share their ideas between institutions as well. And the next one is to bring about transformative change during the research process. So transformative change, it means doing something differently. So it's not just more of what we do already, or it's not just a slight, I don't know, necessarily, I'm just trying to think where I am. It's not just doing more of what we do or even doing less of something. It's actually trying to bring something different to the party, okay? Of course, we need to carry on doing all the good things. We don't just dump all of that. But it's also thinking about, if I make a slight change and I try something different, if that's successful, that's actually going to enhance my practice. So it's not being afraid, it's being quite brave and not always doing what you've always done because you've always done it. Okay. It's trying other things to see, could this possibly make things better? I mean, it could be introducing an innovative idea, or in assessing and reflecting on the effectiveness of something that's exists in practice that you have always done. But whatever it is that you're doing, it's always looking to improve your practice. So action research, it has the potential to generate genuine and sustained improvements to schools and other educational settings. It gives practitioners new opportunities to reflect and to assess their practice, to test out ideas, different methods, different materials, and to assess how effective those new approaches are, and to share feedback with fellow team members, and to make decisions about what approaches are actually ones that need to be taken forward into future practice. I don't know how long I took there. Have I got another 5 minutes? Because I've just got some bits I would like to. Brilliant. Okay. Right. So that was the overview. I actually find these bits very interesting as well. So I was hoping I'd have time to add them. So action research is not without critics. I've mentioned already the findings are not generalizable. So it doesn't mean that, across the whole of the country, whatever you report that you found during your action research, that can be duplicated and replicated anywhere else in the country, because it's very much dependent on the context. It's very contextualized. So you need to be aware of that as a major criticism. And you also need to make sure that your action research is well thought out and systematic. So this helps you to establish reliability and validity, okay, within the piece of research. So one way of doing that, and to me, probably the most, well, they're all quite important, probably one of the most important, is to keep a record, keep a journal of all of the events, all of the action, and also all of those critical thoughts, all of that critical reflection. Journaling, so keep a record of all of it. Also, within that, you're going to have all your interpretations of, of your evaluations of events. You need to validate those interpretations. So you need to do this through interviews or discussions with colleagues, the children and young people, the parents. You need to be talking to other people and to be validated the fact that, was your interpretation the only interpretation of events? Well, it could well have been seen quite differently by other people. If somebody was observing, another colleague was observing your lesson, for example, they may well, interpret and see something quite different to what you think that you've seen. So it's very important to go back to the children and young people, certainly, and also those other adults involved. It's also important to gather data from multiple sources for consistency. So ask colleagues about their experiences as well. They might be using the same resources as you. You might all think that you're using the same approaches. So it could be useful to actually share experiences and see if it's happening across a team, across an institution. Ask yourself, does the phenomenon always remain the same? Or is it different at other times? Or if certain individuals are present or absent, does that change it in some way? These kind of questions, okay, these are the ones that actually they do help you to form your strategies and your interventions, as well as obviously adding to these ideas of reliability and validity. You also need to make sure that you're engaging in a process of systematic reflection. So reflecting after each action in each cycle and having reflexive discussions with critical friends, as I think it's Whitehead describes them. So reflexivity, you're talking about acknowledging individual bias, potential power and influence that's exerted by yourself, by other individuals that might be present. So practicing reflexivity promotes an awareness of how our own behavior, or even just our presence, influences structures, practices, and those around us. I swear by this book, Bolton, when it talks about reflexivity. It's a reflective practice by Gilly Bolton. Don't know if you can see that, but there's some wonderful exercises in there which they help to reveal kind of our own thoughts, our own biases and things like that quite well. And a lot of it is done through writing, journaling, events and thoughts about those events. So I think I've probably used my time now. So if you have any questions, please jot anything down now and we can talk about those later. I'm going to pass over to Zahra now, who is currently on the MA program that this is a taster of one of the modules from. So I'm not sure whether Zahra would like me to, shall I keep the screen up and you just start off and I'll just move to your slides, or would you like me to take this down and you
keep it and I can, what? Thank you.
Off you go.
Hello, everybody. My name is Zahra. Firstly, I want to thank Lynette and Mona to give me this opportunity, and thank you for being here. A little bit of background about me. I've been a Farsi teacher for more than 20 years across different levels and different countries. I have had the opportunity to work in education system of both Iran and the UK. I've been exposed to very interesting similarities and differences between culture and language for both two countries. Recently, I conducted an action research and based in my supplementary school with my 15 students in Persian GCSE. Based on my work and experience, I'm going to cover a few questions. The first question, as you can see, how did you come to identify your action research? For any research, identifying the issue, the research question is very important. For me, it happened when after school closure in April 2020, when, as you know, school was closed due to a pandemic. Students were out of school and they were studying through remote teaching, and they were at home. All these led to lost learning in some families, especially those with limited IT access. In this context, I found students were easily distracted from the class, being engaged in the class, and they did something like gaming, even gaming and texting during the class. Sometimes I receive some text from students, and when I look at the text, say, what are they? And I didn't know, I had no idea because they were unrelated to the subject of the lesson. But then I realized they wanted to send to other person, to their friends. They were doing something else in my class. So it was time, according to McNiff, to identify a problematic issue and then imagine a possible solution. In this case, my issue was that I was interested in researching was how can I help my student to be more engaged in my online class. The second, could you please? Yeah, thank you. The second question, as you can see, again, how have you involved others? In any research, especially action research, involvement of others is very valuable. I began by head teacher, consulting with the head teacher as gatekeeper and asking for her permission to conduct the research in supplementary school. Then I wrote to the parents to request their permission for their children to take part. Then I involved students by recording the class and followed by request their feedback. As Lynette said, feedback of students is very, very important. The other involvement was observation. I observed 2 classes, one from primary and one secondary, and asked some friends, colleagues to come to my class and observe my class and give me feedbacks. And I have regular contact with Lynette as supervisor, give me a lot of think and help me for all steps of the research. And I interview some colleagues to understand what issues and challenges they faced in online online classes and how how they deal with the issues, because it was important for me to know other people, how they deal and find a solution. Next, please. The third question about difficulties. Yes, definitely I had. And I'm sure some of you had the same. Honestly, both online teaching and research were completely new to me. I had know the same situation in Iran or in the UK. So I struggle with something. Sometimes when I wanted to do some activities in my classes, I faced with some difficulties. For example, a game in language lessons called Pass the Ball. Imagine how could ask my student to pass the ball online. So this kind of issue and difficulties, it's not just me. I saw some students struggle with, for example, some of the students had to share their devices, their computer or laptop with siblings at home or with parents who work from home. Sometimes they were looking for a quiet space in their house because the house used to be a calm place for their rest, but now it's like a school. So they had some thing. And also some of them had the internet connection problem in both sides, me and them, and Wi-Fi, something like that. So we come up with all of this. Next, please. Yeah, the advice, finally, instead of advice, I would like to share what I have learned from this research. I have learned that action research is an appropriate way to address the issue in my class and outside the class, even in real world. And it's given me the opportunity to research on my own work, not others. The other thing I have learned was to be able to learn more from my colleagues, from collaboration with others, and give me this opportunity to take responsibility for my action, for my thinking. In all of these was something I really needed, and I wanted to know about them. This was the journey, my journey of action research, and I recommend this highly to my friends, my colleagues, and I will do definitely next year in my class, as we talked to my head teacher, and she was quite happy and supportive. Yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Right, okay, so we're going to, in a few moments, pop you into breakout rooms, and just for a few minutes to get you to think about forming your own action research question. So before I do that, I just wanted to give you some examples. I've got another book which I've been reading, which is really useful. Don't know if you can see that. It's Action Research for New Teachers, Evidence-Based Evaluation of Practice, and it's Forster and Epigesi. So what I like about this book is the fact that it's such an easy read for the new action researcher. And the part I was looking at actually was about coming up with your questions and what you're going to do for your action research on, what your focus is going to be. And it's really good because it just gives some examples and some things that you don't want to do as well. So an example of what would be a good action research question is, how can I develop my practice in assessment for learning to enable children to make good progress? It's a very good question, and good for your, obviously, your professional development. Another one, which is about early years. I want to develop my skills in conversation with reception-aged children to promote sustained shared thinking. So these are all helping you to develop your skills and develop your own teaching. It's then got a couple of examples of things that you wouldn't do as an action research, and they made me smile, so I'm going to share them with you. The first one, I think this is mainly early years again. Do children prefer stickers or stamps? And it says, best avoided. Answering this will not improve your teaching skills. And the next one is laminating resources a good use of taxpayers' money? Best avoided for obvious reasons. So it's a very easy book to access. So just something, if you're thinking about embarking upon action research for the first time, it's 2017. It's just quite a nice book, and I'll put the details in the chat for that and for the Gilly Bolton one as well. So what we're going to ask you to do, now you've had a flavour of what Zahra's question, action research question was, and some examples there of some good action research questions and things that perhaps wouldn't be so useful to you. What I want you to do when you go into your breakout room is describe a work problem or difficulty. Okay, it very often comes from things that people would term a problem, something that they've really been struggling over, that they really, it's come to light that something needs to change. When you're thinking about what this looks like, try and put yourself into your workplace at the front of your classroom or somewhere in your classroom. And remember, you've got all your senses. So don't just think about what you see. Think about also about sounds. Think about, the lighting within the room. Think about, these are all things that can actually have an effect. Think about your own emotions when you go into that classroom, because that could have a bearing on it as well. I want you to focus your mind on whatever that difficulty or problem is, and then just start thinking about what if. So if you could change anything, what would you do? So what if? You'll come up with some ideas that they won't be realistic, and you'll know straight away that they're not things that you would be able to do. But actually, amongst all of those ideas, there's going to be something which is going to be your action research question. So, as I say, this has come from the Bolton book, this activity. Mona's now actively popping you into breakout rooms. So I believe you're going to be in those rooms for just 10 minutes. So please stay with us, because we've got a question and answer afterwards. We'll see you in 10 minutes with lots of lovely ideas of what you might research.
Welcome back, everybody. Jane, am I good to hand over to you to field the Q&A?
Absolutely. So yeah, I was just checking there in the chat box. There doesn't appear to be any questions that have been posted, but now's your opportunity. So you've had your chance to discuss action research in your breakout group. So does anybody want to volunteer to report back from the groups and pose any questions or comments for Lynette? Please just jump in.
I'll jump in. Hi.
Great. Go for
Hello.
it.
Hello. Hi. Yes, my name's Tamara, and I have been working in a school for since 2019. I've been working a lot with SEN children in mainstream schools, and me and Dolphin as well, and Macabul, we were talking about how SEN children and how they function in mainstream schools, and there's quite a big barrier there. Me and Dolphin also came up to the conclusion that it's probably due to mainstream teachers not having that training on how to educate and care for SEN children, and the domino effect of it affecting not only the child that needs help, but the class and also the teachers and the learning support assistants as well. So we've realized that can become very strenuous on everybody, really.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It is interesting, particularly to me as well, because I teach a module called SEND and Inclusion for third-year undergraduates. And you know, one of the assignments that my undergraduates, they've just completed it, just got their grades back, and they did fabulously, was about looking at these deficits, you know, in kind of the rollout of the Children and Families Act 2014 and the SENCOP 2015, and how a lot of these deficits are flagged up by the House of Commons report, by Ofsted report, by, you know, basically everything that's out there. And it's talking about lack of funding for, you know, teacher education around SEND. So I think it's very, very perceptive, you know, the way that you've picked up on seeing that difficulty. There has been move towards putting more about SEND into teacher training, initial teacher training programs. But the thing is, it's often, a lot of it is being put in as like an optional module that can be taken, rather than there being more content in the mandatory modules. But I think a lot of universities across the country are looking at that. But very perceptive of you that there's a huge a deficit in training. There is a huge gap there that needs to be filled, and it needs government funding to obviously, you know, support bridging that. Anyone else have anything else on that they'd like to bring in?
If I could share something, actually what I discussed in the group was the fact that in my research is not teacher context. It is in the context of communities, faith communities, where it's action research to bring about change in environmental practices in faith communities. And with the action research was being done with discussion groups drawn from the faith communities. And the whole thing was to get to understand what would make a change. And so the group, which comprised about 10, 15 people, would discuss among themselves, together with me as an insider researcher, as a participant, as to what should be tried. And the action was really trying out different things. So, for example, if the idea was to stop using styrofoam and plastic cutlery in the food events in the faith communities. So that the idea there really was how to bring about that particular change. What would make the change? What kind of interventions are needed to be made within the communities, faith communities, to bring about that change? And I thought it was an interesting experience where you're going through different interventions and trying to see what actually makes a change, what makes a difference, and what does not. And then you think about other things that you need to do in order to bring about change.
Paul, can I ask a question there? Because that's really sounds like a fascinating context. And the way you describe it, it sounds almost like community organizing. So almost using action research as a kind of tool to mobilize, to organize communities, to support them, to identify what do we need to change? How do we want to change? Is that how you saw it?
Yeah. So essentially, I have a passion for environmental change in the world generally, and I really wanted to make a difference for these communities, but working with them. So yeah, I saw the project really in which the discussion groups and who represent the microcosm of the community will actually discuss what is the problem, how can we look at the problem, and how can we make a difference in this problem, in this particular situation. So it brings about change in the communities, where that is the end result that's supposed to come. But the process is very interesting because it was not easy. It was a wicked problem in many respects. It was a problem that did not, yield quick, easy solutions. And there were all kinds of issues and impediments. And there's a question of mindset. There's a question of faith. Do your faith teachings actually come into play at all in these faith communities? And how are they actually, how do they actually make a difference in terms of your actual practices as opposed to your professed beliefs? So all that came into it, and I thought it's very interesting. So it was done as a university action research project, and although the end result was to make a change and to improve, but the whole idea was to use action research modalities to know the various cycles and to see what is the way to change. And one thing that I found very interesting is when you started with a small problem, which looked so easy, like, let's get rid of plastic and styrofoam, and substitute it with something. So you get to biodegradable. And then biodegradable is not composted by the local authorities. So you get into another problem. Then you say, okay, let's go for reusables. And we don't have space for a dishwasher in the community places. So what do we do? So you get into, solutions and problems that solution actually brings about. So there are emerging problems that keep on. And then you say, okay, no, let's think in terms of having a holistic environmental plan, which will look at the whole issue about carbon footprint and what is things like sharing cars, coming to the mosque. So it grows. It grew from the issue of simply making one change to seeing holistically what the environmental concerns are in the context of what is happening in climate change discussions globally.
What interests me there as well is this idea of you talking about, as a community, you were going forward with this action research project. So it was collaborative inquiry, which is another term that you will hear as well. And you'll hear it associated with action research.
Yes.
A really interesting project.
Thanks.
Okay, are there any other questions? I have one, but I'm not sure I should take that privilege. Does anyone else out there have a question to ask before I do? Please don't be afraid to speak up.
This will be the last question, by the way, just because we're going to definitely finish on time.
Okay, I'm gonna shoot. So my question, I really like the idea of collaboration, and I really like the example there about communities coming together to kind of collectively work through problems, and then solving a problem can present another problem and another problem, and on it goes. So it becomes a bigger project in itself. But I wonder if there's a way, whether there are any examples of action research that don't start with that problem, because I just wonder if beginning with the problem almost sets it up as something's broken, something's wrong, we need to fix it, and that becomes the kind of ethos or the kind of modus operandi. Whereas is it possible to approach an issue or a conundrum and have it framed in a more generative sense of us coming together to grapple with this issue and how else we might do it, rather than fixing a problem?
This is why I started along the line of sort of saying about for professional development. So it might be that you're not capable of, encouraging children in sustained shared thinking. It might just be that you want to try other things. You want to see if there is another way of doing it. So, this is the thing. I mean, I kind of highlighted some words in green, which I thought might be things that people might pick up actually. And problem was one of those, because I kind of had problem in green, and then I kind of had difficulty that wasn't highlighted. And I did wonder whether people would pick up that a lot of the time action research, you do think of it as something isn't working, I need to find something else. But actually, it doesn't necessarily have to be that. It can just be that looking at something afresh with new eyes, you know, this idea of we've always done it this way. You don't have to carry on always doing it that way. You can try something new. And if there's something new isn't as good as what you were doing before, well, that's fine. But the whole process of, working through these ideas of evaluating and this kind of, having these sort of critical looks at practices that we do in any case, it's building that kind of awareness within us that, everything that we do in our practice, even the tiny little facets of it, they just changing one little thing can make a vast improvement for somebody, maybe for one student within your class, etc. So
okay, thank you. Thanks everyone. Back to you, Mona.
Thank you. Yeah, it's the kind of that, permission to be curious. I think sometimes workplaces are so judgmental, especially education, where am I getting this right? Am I getting this right? So it's quite nice to change the narrative and just go, what do I want to learn about or think about or do more of, or change or transform. So just a few thank yous before we wrap up. So thank you so much, Lynette. Thank you so much, Zahra. Zahra, in particular, thank you, because you've taken your MA presentation and turned it into a public lecture, and we're so grateful to you for doing that. Thanks to everyone supporting the event. So Jane, thank you for the Q&A. Faiza, thank you for the technical support. And of course, thank you to everybody who's here and for taking the kind of early evening or whichever part of the day you're in to share with us and to be part of this event. We'll post the video of the event online, and we'll be doing more events like this in the future. Easiest way to stay connected with us is probably through Twitter. Faiza's going to pop our Twitter handle in the chat. But there is also, if you're interested in the MA program or somebody where you think, yeah, this is right for them, then we'll also post our kind of web page in the chat, which has more information. You're very welcome to reach out to myself, to Lee Jerome, our program leader, because we're always very happy to chat to whoever. So thank you so much. Have a fabulous evening, and thank you again for being part of it.
Thank you, Mona.
Thank you
very much.
Bye.
Thank you.